Hello everybody, welcome to the Fightful Boxing Podcast. I am your host, Carlos Toro, riding solo this week. No guest this week, but we do have a lot to talk about. I am recording this hours after it was announced that Gennadiy Golovkin is now working with Eddie Hearn ahead of their IBF middleweight championship, or at least Golovkin's IBF middleweight title fight against Derevyanchenko on October 5th at Madison Square Garden. We'll get into all of that in just a bit, but before we do, gotta get the plugs out of the way. Starting off, if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, really helps us. Subscribe to our Fightful MMA and Boxing channel. You're also a fan of pro wrestling, head on over to the Fightful Pro Wrestling channel, where we got plenty of podcasts, breaking news, interviews, the whole 9 yards, and just about everything pro wrestling related. And over here on the Fightful MMA and Boxing YouTube channel, we got you covered with boxing podcasts, results, podcasts featuring a ton of special guests. Just last week we had Brandon Figueroa, the interim WBA super bantamweight champion. And on the MMA side, we got the Fightful MMA podcast with Sean Ross Sapp and Ryzen English commentator Joe Ferraro, Showdown Joe Ferraro. Both of them do a tremendous job covering the MMA world, from UFC to MMA, even a little bit of Ryzen here and there. So we got you covered in all things MMA, pro wrestling, and boxing. But now it's time for the Fightful Boxing Podcast, the second week of this revival, and I want to say this is revival number 28 of the Fightful Boxing Podcast. In case you didn't listen to last week's show or may have just forgotten, the podcast took a bit of a hiatus because I was moving from Puerto Rico all the way to Cleveland, Ohio. And it took me a little while to sort of get everything ready, get the equipment set up. My home base is not fully done yet, which is why the audio may not sound super crisp and clear, at least for these couple of weeks. But hey, we got you covered with the Fightful Boxing Podcast. It is here. We got plenty to talk about. And probably the biggest story this week, arguably, is this union, this working relationship between Eddie Hearn and Gennadiy Golovkin. Now, let me sort of preface, for those of you who are listening and are not aware of what is going on between those two. So it was reported, I believe, by Mike Coppinger of The Athletic earlier this week that Golovkin and Hearn were going to work together and try to, moving forward for the remainder of Golovkin's deal, which runs through 2021. They still got 5 fights left, including the one that we got in a few weeks at Madison Square Garden, Golovkin versus Derevyanchenko for the IBF middleweight championship of the world. And it was announced today, August 22nd, that Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing and Golovkin's Triple G Promotions have signed a deal, or at least they reached a deal, where, in layman's terms, you will see a lot of Matchroom Boxing involvement in Triple G's fights moving forward. Now, it should be mentioned. I should mention this. Golovkin did not sign, the traditional promotional agreement with Eddie Hearn. It's not like he's, on the Matchroom Boxing roster. That's not what this is. What it is Golovkin, as he's trying to work himself up as a promoter, because that's what he wants to do when he retires. He wants to be a promoter. That's why he started Triple G Promotions. It's not one of these, companies where, you have a fighter and they got technically their own promotional company, but they don't really run promotional events, or at least they don't operate in the same way like a Golden Boy Promotions or a Matchroom Boxing or a Top Rank or any of that kind of stuff. But you got Golovkin, who is really starting to build himself up as a promoter. And with Eddie Hearn, what's going to happen is, at least from what I understand, it's that you will see Matchroom Boxing fighters possibly fight on the DAZN whenever Triple G has his fights, because the way it's operating is basically kind of the same way where you see Matchroom fighters on Golden Boy promotion cards on the DAZN every so often, and vice versa. It's now essentially that, but now it's sort of official. It's done. So now we have Matchroom Boxing having a presence in Triple G's fights. It's Triple G is sort of starting to build a solid team around him, not just with the DAZN, but now with Matchroom Boxing, with the support of Eddie Hearn, and I should also mention Tom Loeffler. Yes, he is still with the team, Triple G's, I guess, representative now, as you can call it. I don't know. I remember a reporter on Twitter saying that he's still representing Golovkin through Triple G promotion. So Tom Loeffler was Golovkin's promoter for years and years, and when Golovkin's contract with HBO ended, there was a lot of speculation that Tom Loeffler and Golovkin would split. And then when Golovkin signed with the DAZN, everyone thought it was essentially, Golovkin was gonna, fight, quote unquote, under the Golden Boy Promotions umbrella or the Matchroom Boxing umbrella, and that Tom Loeffler was going to be left out of the dust. That ended up being untrue in every way, shape, or form. Tom Loeffler is still involved in Golovkin's career. I don't know how much. Compared to when he was, I guess, officially his promoter, but he is still involved. That is still that is what is happening here between Golovkin and Loeffler. He is still part of the team, but I guess in this way, at this stage of Golovkin's career, he is taking a more direct approach in terms of controlling his career, because he only has a couple of years left in his career. He's almost 40 years old. He's got 5 fights left in this deal with the DAZN. And there's a lot to actually like about this new relationship with Eddie Hearn. So what you have here is now essentially you have the Matchroom Boxing logo stamped on Golovkin's fights from here on forward, for at least through 2021, and that kind of gives Hearn an in when it comes to negotiating Golovkin's fights. Obviously, the biggest thing for Golovkin right now is to get the trilogy fight against Canelo Alvarez. At this point, is now looking like it's going to be 2020 if it ever happens, and I'm not entirely convinced it will happen. So, what do? If you don't get that trilogy fight against Canelo Alvarez, then Triple G is going to have to explore other options for potential fights. And there's a few to like here because of this working relationship with Eddie Hearn. Eddie Hearn has a lot of middleweights and super middleweights, and I will get to the super middleweights in a second. But he does have Daniel Jacobs, who was a former world champion. Then Jacobs and Golovkin fought back in 2017. That was a razor-thin, close fight between the two. Golovkin beat Jacobs by, I think it was like all scores having it like 114, 113, or something in that ballpark. At least I personally had a 114, 113. It was a very close and competitive fight, and there's no doubt if Jacobs and Golovkin fought again, it would still be a very entertaining and very, very close fight. They also got, Eddie Hearn and Matchroom Boxing, they also got Demetrius Andrade, who is the WBO world champion. That's a potential fight that's been kind of bubbling around for a little while. Andrade wants to fight either Canelo or Golovkin, and hey, that fight is entirely doable, and that'd be one hell of a unification. And if you want to try to really build up to Canelo versus Triple G3, and if you really want to work for, September 2020, and in the Mexican Independence Day weekend 2020, instead of Cinco de Mayo weekend 2020, you can do that. You can have Canelo take care of business against whoever is gonna face him for his next fight before the end of the year, and maybe his next fight. And then you have Golovkin, if he beats Sergey Derevyanchenko, he could face Demetrius Andrade. That'd be one hell of a unification. I'd sign up for that one. Golovkin is the type of fighter that he will bring a lot of pressure forward, and I did like what I saw at times with the Steve Rolls fight earlier this year, with Golovkin now entering this training relationship with Jonathan Banks, who used to be Vladimir Klitschko's trainer. And I don't know, this feels, Golovkin seems a lot happier now, and he seems more confident in the ring. I like what I saw against Steve Rolls. Steve Rolls was performed very admirably in the short fight that he did. He even gave Golovkin a little bit of trouble in at certain times in the first couple of rounds. But overall, I like what I saw with Golovkin against Steve Rolls, and I think he's the type of guy that will push the fight forward, and he's going to force Demetrius Andrade to really fight. And that's the thing about fights like these. I like them in the sense that I know how good Demetrius Andrade is. He's not exactly a crowd pleaser. Not a lot of people really enjoy his fights. But part of it, in my opinion, has to do with the fact that Andre doesn't feel challenged. He makes it all look easy, and it almost looks like he doesn't feel the pressure to have to get his shift into another gear and really turn the action up. He's dominating all of his opposition ever since from beating Walter Kautondokwa to, not that long ago when he faced Maciej Zaleski. He's dominated all of his fights. He trounced Arthur Akavov not too long ago. So, but when you have a guy like Golovkin, it's not going to be as easy facing, for Andrade. So now you have Andrade in a situation where he's going to have to really try and really hit Golovkin just to stand a chance of winning, and I think that's going to make for a fantastic fight. But if none of those fights sound appetizing, there's still a couple of solid names at super middleweight if Golovkin ever decides to go that route. And there are two names that I think are very, very notable that Eddie Hearn has on his roster at 168 pounds. You got WBA champion Callum Smith, who is, I think, for all intents and purposes, aside from Canelo, who still technically holds the WBA regular super middleweight title, but not counting Canelo, I think for a lot of people, Callum Smith is the best in the world at 168 pounds, and that'd be one hell of a fight. Callum Smith is spectacular. I'm not really impressed with his title reign so far. Ever since he beat George Groves, he was inactive for a very long time. Came back on June 1st. He beat Hassan and Dom, and I'm just, which he beat him, but and Dom's a fringe contender at middleweight at best. So I don't know how he got a shot at a world title at super middleweight. It made no sense whatsoever, but Callum Smith beat Hassan and Dom. It doesn't really tell me anything. I'm not really impressed with Callum Smith so far for his title reign, but I'm not saying Callum Smith is no good. I think Callum Smith is the best super middleweight in the world, not counting Canelo Alvarez. So if Callum Smith doesn't fight Canelo next, and if Callum Smith doesn't have another big fight coming up soon, who knows? Maybe Gennadiy Golovkin. That'd be a really interesting fight. Billy Joe Saunders, the WBO champion, who just recently signed with Eddie Hearn just a couple of weeks ago. He signed with Matchroom Boxing. That could be a really good fight. That fight was brewing for a while now, actually. They were actually in the midst of potentially making that fight happen, Saunders and Triple G, if Golovkin didn't get, I believe it was the second fight against Canelo Alvarez. So now you have really no real obstacle to make when for a potential Golovkin versus Saunders fight. It doesn't even need to be 168 pounds. It could be a 160. Saunders was just the champion. He was the WBO middleweight champion a year ago. So, and I think Saunders will have no problem going down to 160 pounds if the fight against Golovkin can be made. So when you're looking at this, all of this Eddie Hearn, Golovkin type of deal. There is a lot to like about it in terms of what can be made in the future. Again, if the third fight against Canelo Alvarez isn't made, fine. I can go to bed not ever seeing that third fight. But there are so many great fights for Golovkin down the road now that he's working with Eddie Hearn. I like it. I like a lot about it. And it's all going to begin with October 5th at Madison Square Garden. Golovkin versus Sergey Derevyanchenko. This is an interesting fight. Now, I personally don't have a problem with Derevyanchenko getting another shot at the title. Or at least, not necessarily another shot at the title, but being the mandatory challenger for the title so soon after he lost to Daniel Jacobs. And when I say so soon, I mean he lost the belt to Daniel Jacobs when the two fought for the vacant title. I believe it was 10 months ago. Yeah, it was last October, ironically, also at Madison Square Garden. So now Derevyanchenko is back in a position where he could win, and I think this is going to be a really interesting fight. This is by in no way, shape, or form is this a guarantee win for Golovkin. I don't think Derevyanchenko should be counted out. He fought Daniel Jacobs very, very well. And the fight ended up, and when they fought last year, that fight was a split decision. I thought Jacobs won that fight decisively. It was close, but it was decisive. I thought there really wasn't that much of a debate for Derevyanchenko to win. Although, I mean, of course, everybody's gonna, for at least in the promotion leading up to the fight, they're gonna play up as how close that fight against Jacob was, and how a lot of people thought that Derevyanchenko won, which isn't really that true. But Derevyanchenko is a solid contender at 160 pounds, and he should be viewed as a viable threat to Triple G. I think part of it has to do with the fact that Derevyanchenko wasn't really, I wouldn't say prepared, because that kind of implies that Derevyanchenko didn't train enough or didn't take the fight seriously against Daniel Jacobs. But he's never been in the ring against a guy like Daniel Jacobs when those two fought. And I think losing that fight in the way that he did was really good experience for Derevyanchenko moving forward. Because let's remember, Derevyanchenko was only 12-0 when he only had 12 fights as a pro. So it's not like, he's faced all these world beaters and then he just lost to Daniel Jacobs. It's not the case at all. So I think having that experience of facing Daniel Jacobs is going to really help Sergey Derevyanchenko in this fight against Golovkin. And hey, I wouldn't be surprised if Derevyanchenko wins, or at least makes this an extremely close fight like he did against Daniel Jacobs. So, I like this fight. I'm looking forward to it. I wish I could be going to this fight to Madison Square Garden, but as of now, I'm stuck in Cleveland. I wish I could go in there, but I bet you it's going to be a good atmosphere over there in New York. So now heading on over to this AJ Anthony Joshua situation. This, I guess you could call this a heel turn. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, so Anthony Joshua very recently was being asked about the first fight against Andy Ruiz. And there was this, and one thing that really stuck out to everyone was, Anthony Ruiz, Anthony Joshua was saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, Anthony Joshua was saying that Andy Ruiz, he beat him with a lucky punch. It wasn't really, he didn't really beat him. He just got lucky with a clean punch after he got knocked down when they fought in June. And after that, and around that time, there seemed to be this really dumb, in my opinion, really dumb feud over social media with Lennox Lewis, of all people, former heavyweight champion of the world, And those two, and the social media jabs, it's been really, really awkward. Like, for example, you talk about a guy like Anthony Joshua. Right away, should be focusing on his rematch against Anthony Ruiz, not have a social media feud with Lennox Lewis. Is that it was all weird. It's, fine, if you don't like Lennox Lewis, that's fine. But you don't need to go out and say, Lennox Lewis is a clown. My legacy is, sit back and enjoy the younger generation coming up and not to be involved, just to appreciate what it takes here. Lennox isn't like that. We are cut from a different cloth. And I've had 22 fights, and I was talking about being undisputed. What am I going to do after? Go and fight Otto Wallin? Trying to take a shot at Tyson Fury for his fight against Otto Wallin next month in Las Vegas. And then, it's really weird. It was very bizarre, and it felt weird. It was a weird flex. It was a bit of a weird flex to try to go out and go to Lennox Lewis and say, look at what all I've done. I've only had like less than 2,000 fights, and I've already a world champion, held 3 of the 4 world titles. And it was weird. I don't know where Anthony Joshua is getting this, and I kind of have a bit of a theory about why Anthony Joshua is doing this. Albeit, it's not necessarily a strong theory, or probably one that even makes a whole lot of sense, but hear me out. So Anthony Joshua, obviously with that first fight against Andy Ruiz, he's trying, that fight against Andy Ruiz was his U.S. debut. He was trying, he and Eddie Hearn were aiming to turn Joshua into this next American heavyweight star, or at least next heavyweight star in America. I should clarify that Joshua is not American, he's British. And the way it all went down, it was he lost his title in a massive upset. No one is really taking him seriously. So my theory is that, one, Anthony Joshua, this heel turn, this villainous turn is not genuine whatsoever. I think Joshua is sort of playing it up for the social media, and he understands it is possible. He could look at the United States and some of the biggest stars in combat sports, guys like Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather. And those guys, look at their antics. No one they are essentially heels. And to use a wrestling terminology, they're essentially heels. And they draw these massive crowds, huge pay-per-view records. And I can see a scenario where Joshua looks at that and thinks to himself, if I become this like hated fighter from the UK coming to take over America, people are going to want to watch me lose. And I'm going to be this massive star, and this will really draw up crowds, it'll really drum up business for myself, for Eddie Hearn, for the DAZN, for Matchroom Boxing. And it's weird because, like, Anthony Joshua, he never seemed to be the guy to act like a Conor McGregor or Floyd Mayweather. It's just, a lot of people try to imitate that style, and 99% of the time, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Because you need you need to have a certain level of charisma, of natural charisma, to be able to pull something like that off. And to be able to go in halfway around the world and be an instant draw. Conor McGregor was able to do it, and other fighters were able to do it. Gennadiy Golovkin was able to do it. But the issue here is no one in America is really taking him seriously. And if he shows all this bravado and sort of downplaying the way he lost, downplaying Andy Ruiz, downplaying Lennox Lewis, again, of all people. Why Lennox Lewis? And you go out to Saudi Arabia, after all the hoopla that was made about this rematch, and Anthony Joshua ends up losing to Andy Ruiz, credibility in America immediately goes down to zero, to a point where it may never recover. But if Joshua beats Ruiz and brings this kind of villainous persona into the United States, then this kind of calculated gamble could still work. Because now you're looking at a scenario where now you want the crowd to really want to have that Joshua-Deontay Wilder fight next year or in 2021. You can make that possible. And you certainly have like a fighter that people clearly want to root for, and a fighter people clearly want to root against. Good guy against bad guy. It's the oldest trick in the book in the fight business, in pro wrestling. It's the oldest trick in the book to try to draw up a big event, draw up a huge crowd. And when done right, it always works. It always works. So I guess maybe you look at that scenario and think, maybe justify in a way, you can sort of understand why Anthony Joshua is doing something like this. But it's a calculated risk. If Joshua is having this feud with Lennox Lewis, and Joshua goes to Saudi Arabia and loses to Andy Ruiz, no one in the United States, or at least the collective mindset of boxing fans, as fickle as they are in the United States and in social media, they will never take Anthony Joshua seriously again. They will never take him seriously again, because you go out and you get upset by Andy Ruiz, and you essentially have your Mike Tyson, Buster Douglas moment. But the difference here is Tyson eventually recovered and became champion of the world and became a legitimate threat for a while. But Joshua, if he loses to Andy Ruiz a second time, he's essentially going to have to work all his way back up to the beginning. And the issue here is that Andy Ruiz and Deontay Wilder, they sort of fight under the PBC umbrella. And Anthony Joshua isn't going to go to them to challenge for a title. So now you have a scenario where you essentially have to wait until one of those two champions either lose their titles to someone else, or vacate or strip their titles. And there was some discussion about Andy Ruiz potentially vacating the WBO or the IBF title or something like that. And if Andy Ruiz wins, and if he doesn't fight Kubrat Pulev, who is the mandatory challenger to the IBF title, then that title, the IBF title, is stripped away from Andy Ruiz, and that opens up an opportunity for Anthony Joshua to at least reclaim a piece of the World Heavyweight Championship back. But it doesn't matter if he gets that title back. After losing to Andy Ruiz, his credibility in the United States is shot, and it's hurt almost beyond repair. So I don't know what's going to happen between Anthony Joshua and Lennox Lewis. I don't know. I don't know what the end game is for either guy, but if you have someone like Anthony Joshua, and he's doing all he can to try to turn himself into a big heel, and then you have him lose to Andy Ruiz the second time, no one's ever going to take him seriously again. The fight against Deontay Wilder would be officially dead, and a fight against Tyson Fury would also be officially dead. I mean, they still do pretty big business if they ever do settle things in the ring, but the allure of it won't be the same as it was when Anthony Joshua was undefeated. And that's the issue here. So I don't know if Anthony Joshua really is trying to become this hated guy, so that if he does go to America again, he'll be able to draw more crowds because they want to see him lose. Similar to kind of like Floyd Mayweather, or any other big-time pro wrestling villain. I don't know. I don't know if that's real, but that's my theory on it. If it doesn't make any sense, okay, but those are my thoughts on the Anthony Joshua matter after kind of thinking about it for a little while. And I'm kind of seeing, maybe we'll have a scenario where Anthony Joshua does beat Andy Ruiz in Saudi Arabia, does become this big boxing heel, and goes to America and takes over in that manner. Who knows? Maybe it will work out in the end, but it's a calculated risk, to say the least. And lastly, before we sort of end this episode, this solo episode of the Fightful Boxing Podcast, I want to do a quick rundown of the WBO. I guess I will call this WBO Title Fight Week, because there is so much in terms of WBO World Championship bouts taking place this weekend all across the world, which is actually incredible. And so, WBO Fight Week, it's it has a little bit of a ring to it. Actually, I did not think of the name. It was Gustavo Olivieri, who is the in-house counsel for the WBO, who basically named it as such on Twitter when he and I were talking a little bit about the fights that were coming up this weekend. And really, a week ago, or at least when I tweeted out about all the fights taking place this Saturday, or even this weekend in general, I didn't realize how many world title fights are taking place, how many big fights are taking place this week. So let's do a real quick rundown of all those fights taking place this week. So starting off, the first WBO title fight taking place on Saturday comes all the way to Aichi, Japan. Kosei Tanaka versus Jonathan Gonzalez for the WBO flyweight title. Now, for those of you in the United States that are willing to go and watch that fight, I believe that fight will be shown on Ring TV, ringtv.com. Live when the fight goes on. You can also watch it. AsianBoxing.info also will have a live stream of the fight. And for those of you who are not aware of Asian Boxing, the guys over there do phenomenal work covering the Asian boxing landscape from Japan to China, Thailand, the Philippines. They do phenomenal work over there. I suggest you support them, because if it wasn't for them, if it weren't for them, we wouldn't have been able to watch some of Kosei Tanaka's last fights live in beautiful quality, mind you, with this relationship that they have with CBC. And it's a really, really good show with Kosei Tanaka defending his world title against the Puerto Rican challenger Jonathan Gonzalez. We are in an era where it's funny, because this year we are having a lot of Puerto Rico versus Asia in terms of boxing and title fights. It's really weird now that I think about it, because you had Jesus Rojas versus Hanshu, you had Emmanuel Rodriguez go up against Naoya Inoue, you have another fight like that, Vic Salvador versus Wilfredo Mendez Jr., which I will discuss in just a second. And now you got not Vic Salvador, I just said that. You have Kosei Tanaka against Jonathan Gonzalez. I'm going to be honest here. I don't see Kosei Tanaka really struggling to win this fight, or at least making that much of an effort to win this fight compared to his last two fights against Sho Kimura and against Ryuichi Taguchi. Which, by the way, if you have not seen Kosei Tanaka, go watch the fight against Sho Kimura last September. And it was a freaking phenomenal fight those two had. I named it my fight of the year for 2018, and you should definitely find it. I'm pretty sure it's easy to find it online. Kosei Tanaka versus Sho Kimura. And against Ryuichi Taguchi, another very fun fight in Japan. Now you got a situation now, Kosei Tanaka is really starting to get a following out west, even though he's never fought outside Japan, but because he's so good in his accomplishments in the ring, are Lomachenko-esque in the sense that he's already won. This is going to be his 13th fight. And he's already won world titles in 3 different weight classes. He won a world title in his 5th pro fight, which is amazing if you ask me. And now he's in that top 10 pound for pound conversation, in my opinion. And you got a guy like Jonathan Gonzalez, who I don't think he's not a bad fighter whatsoever. And he certainly has done well in rebounding from a loss to Jobert Alvarez a few years ago in Puerto Rico, but he's never really faced anyone of the level of Kosei Tanaka. The closest such fight that he's had to a Kosei Tanaka was when he faced Giovanni Segura. All the way back in 2013, Segura was a former world champion at light flyweight who held a number of titles: lineal, WBA, WBO, and he did well beating Juan Alejo in his last time out. But when you go up against the likes of Ricardo Rodriguez, Julian Yedras, Juan Alejo, and then just step all the way to Kosei Tanaka, I'm sorry, but I don't really see a lot out of Jonathan Gonzalez heading to this fight. Not to mention, he's already been knocked out twice throughout his career, and now you're going up against a better fighter in Kosei Tanaka, who is this electric fighter, very young. He has this incredible ability to just constantly throw punches at you and force you to fight back. And he's not necessarily a power puncher per se. He's not a knockout artist. But he is kind of like Lomachenko in the sense that his sheer pressure alone and his speed and durability does kind of force you to have to play defense. And I don't know where Jonathan Gonzalez can do that a guy like Taguchi and Kimura weren't able to do against Tanaka. Now, the one thing about Tanaka that I don't necessarily like is that he has a tendency to go all out in his fights, and he doesn't really think much about defense. He gets hit a lot for the type of fighter that he is, and maybe that's where Jonathan Gonzalez can catch him. Maybe catch him with a counter left, or actually no, counter right would actually be more like it. But he is prone to leaving his left side a little bit open whenever he throws the right hand, that strong, lightning fast right hand that he has. So I don't know if Jonathan Gonzalez can pick up on that throughout their fight. I'm gonna watch that fight regardless because I love Kosei Tanaka, but my prediction, I say Kosei Tanaka, very late stoppage against Jonathan Gonzalez, 10, 11, 12 round. But I think Kosei Tanaka wins this fight. And now moving on from Japan to the Philippines, where you have John Rial Casimero versus Cesar Ramirez for the WBO interim bantamweight title. This is an interesting fight. I like this fight. I think this actually could be one of the better fights of the weekend. For those of you who have not been keeping up with the career of John Rial Casimero was, up to a certain point, he was sort of well being a contender at 115 pounds, but he didn't really perform that well at 115 compared to how he did at 111, at 108 and 112. Then he had a brief move up above 118 pounds, and he wasn't performing as solid as he was. And then he had the fight, or actually no, my mistake, and not above 118, at 115, he lost to Jonas Sultan. And it was weird because it almost looked like John Rial Casimero wasn't physically able to perform at his best at 115 or at a 122 per se, but you put him at 118 And he just looked right. He looked like he's properly built for that division. And he's only 29 years old, and Jhonryel Casimero has done very well. He's beaten the likes of Kenya Yamashita. He beat Ricardo Espinosa, knocked him out in the final round of an extremely competitive fight in April in Carson, California, to become the interim WBO champion. And now he's going up against a tough fighter, and Cesar Ramirez, who I think is a solid fighter, a solid contender at 118. He's not necessarily a top 10 fighter, to say the least. He's faced the likes of Ryan Burnett in the past, and he's picked up a solid win streak, 6 fights in a row ever since he lost to Ryan Burnett in 2016. He's beaten Eddie Valencia. He's beating a lot of these, like, I don't want to say no names, but they're guys who took Cesar Ramirez the distance, but almost every time out, Cesar Ramirez would either dominate or would stop his opponents. And he's a tough out. I really do think that Cesar Ramirez will bring a lot of trouble to Jhonryel Casimero. But I think Casimero wins this one very narrowly. I think this could be a split decision one. That's how close this fight could be. I like Jhonryel Casimero. I really like Cesar Ramirez, but I think Casimero wins this one. Then moving on to Russia, to Chelyabinsk, Russia. And I don't know if I even pronounced that correctly or not, but whatever. You got Sergey Kovalev returning to Russia for the first time in years, go up against Anthony Yarde for the WBO light heavyweight championship of the world. And bit of a side note, Fightful will have live coverage of that card from Russia. That 3-fight card that's going to be available on ESPN Plus starting at 12:30. We will have live coverage of that. So if you're not able to watch the fight, you want to come in and discuss the fight during the show, feel free to come into Fightful.com to discuss. But moving on, this is going to be an interesting fight. So, Sergey Kovalev, I think at 36 years old, you can still make a great argument that he is still the best light heavyweight in the world just by judging his last fight against Eleider Alvarez. There's a lot to really like from that rematch performance against Alvarez this past February. And I think Kovalev understands that he's at the point of his career where he can't be Crusher Kovalev and try to go for a knockout and instantly destroy guys left and right as he was throughout his reign as champion. He's not at the point where he's gonna be knocking out the Nathan Cleverleys of the world, the Cedric Agnews, the John Pascals of the world, the Vyacheslav Shabransky. He's not that kind of fighter anymore. He's not. But the technically sound, technically gifted fighter that is Sergey Kovalev, the fundamentally gifted fighter that we saw against Eleider Alvarez, I think that is the best light heavyweight boxer in the world. I think he's better than Jean Pascal. I think he's better than Alexander Vostok and Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol, as great as all those guys are. But I think this level of Kovalev is the best. Now, will we see that kind of repeat performance against Anthony Yarde? That's a different question, because there's a lot that we don't know about Anthony Yarde yet. Not from his skill set, because we know that Anthony Yarde is a strong puncher. But the problem here is we've seen nothing but flash from Anthony Yarde, and we haven't seen anything that really tells us this guy's beating Sergey Kovalev or any of these world champions. The names that he's faced throughout his career, they really are something to scoff at. No offense, but really, Travis Reeves, Walter Gabriel Sequeira, Darius Sachs, those guys, they are not top 10, top 20, 30, 40. I doubt they're top 50 in that division. You can't really tell me that Anthony Yarde has faced opposition that comes even close to preparing him for Sergey Kovalev. Because no, it's not. That's not the case. Now, there's a lot to like about Anthony Yarde in terms of the promise that he brings. He's in his prime. He's 28 years old, but you're telling me that this 28-year-old fighter from London who's still a little wet behind the ears in terms of getting big fights, preparing him for the likes of Sergey Kovalev. You're telling me that this guy's gonna come in to Russia, to Kovalev's backyard, and beat him? That's a really hard sell, if you ask me. And I get it, and I get it. Anthony Yarde's a really solid fighter, but I don't think Anthony Yarde's gonna beat Sergey Kovalev if Kovalev performs the way he did in his last fight against Eddie Alvarez. Now, if we see the Kovalev that we saw in the first fight against Eddie Alvarez, where he was trying to be Crusher Kovalev and try to knock out Eddie Alvarez, then Anthony Yarde, I'd say, has a shot, because Kovalev has a tendency in recent years to really leave himself wide open, and we've seen when you catch him on the chin real good with a punch or two midway through the fight in the middle rounds, we've seen Kovalev staggered and to a point where he can be stopped. Andre Ward did it in their rematch. Eddie Alvarez did it in their first fight last August in New Jersey. So you can imagine a scenario where Anthony Yarde can beat Sergey Kovalev. But that would mean Kovalev fighting on his worst day, like he did against Eddie Alvarez. And not to say he wasn't fighting, he was at his worst fighting Eddie Alvarez, because Kovalev was still beating, barely beating Kovalev on the scorecards last year. But the style that Kovalev had in that fight should not be the style that Kovalev have moving forward for what's left of his career. If he fights as technically sound and fundamentally gifted as we all know Kovalev is, I think Kovalev wins this one fairly easily. And I believe the last WBO world title fight taking place this weekend is in my backyard of Puerto Rico. What a great time for me to leave Puerto Rico and go to Cleveland, when we finally have a world title fight there, and I leave, and I'm there for it. Vic Saludar versus Wilfredo Mendez for the WBO minimum weight world championship. This, for those of you who are not following Vic Saludar's career, it's a very good one. I don't think enough people give Vic Saludar the credit that he deserves, being a world champion. He's fought a lot of very tough names throughout his career. He's faced the likes of Kosei Tanaka, Toto Landero early in his career. And in his recent and very recently, he's been going to Japan for his title fights. So he's beaten Masataka Taniguchi, Ryuya Yamanaka. Those are not names that just anybody can beat. Those are really solid names at 105 pounds. So you look at a guy like Wilfredo Mendez, who I gotta say has done very, very well ever since he lost a somewhat close fight to back in 2018. He hasn't faced a lot of tough names as of late. His best win was against Daniel Rivera back in May. But that was really, really close. And by the way, I actually do recommend you guys watch that fight, Wilfredo Mendez Jr. Against Daniel Rivera, Wilfredo Mendez. because the scorecards, my God, they could not be any weirder. So I will give you a spoiler, of course. Mendes won that fight. But the scorecards read as follows. 188 Mendes, 97-91 Rivera, 99-89 Mendes. I have never seen scorecards this weird, this bizarre in my life. I've never seen, what is it, I'm trying to do the math here, quick math in my head. What is it, like a 19-point swing from one scorecard to another? I don't think I've ever seen that in boxing. I don't think that's ever happened in boxing, ever. A 19-point swing between Mendes and Rivera. That's how weird this fight was. But yeah, now Mendes is the mandatory challenger to Vic Salvador's title. You know, Mendes he's actually fairly big for someone fighting at 105 pounds. He's tall. He's a tall guy, but standing at 5'5". But I don't know. I don't feel that confident in Mendes. He's still very, very young. He hasn't faced in the same way I make the case for against Anthony Yarde. He's still very young. He hasn't faced a lot of tough opposition, so you don't know what you have in Wilfredo Mendes yet until he faces a Vic Salvador type of fighter. I think Salvador wins this fight, but I think it's going to be fairly close. I actually do think that Mendes, with the help of the Puerto Rican crowd, the home crowd in San Juan, Puerto Rico, I think that'll be a solid scrap. I think that, listen, you can say a lot about Puerto Rican boxing and the state that it's in, given that there are no world champions in any weight class, men or women's, throughout boxing, but they will come out and support the hell out of Wilfredo Mendes for this fight, because they know what a win for Mendes means for Puerto Rican boxing. And who knows? I've had people in Puerto Rico telling me, hey, if he beats Vic Salvador, who's to say that in the absolute best case scenario, we finally have our next big star in Puerto Rican boxing? And you think to yourself, a minimum weight champion, being your top star? That's a little bizarre, but let's not forget, Ivan Calderon was a minimum weight world champion for years, and he was considered one of the top stars in Puerto Rican boxing. And Ivan Calderon, he's a future Hall of Famer just waiting to be enshrined. I believe in his last couple of attempts to get into the International Boxing Hall of Fame were, he just barely missed out on induction. So I think eventually we'll see Ivan Calderon make his way into the Hall of Fame. But I think for now, the current state of Puerto Rican boxing is just very, very, it's very frail, very fragile right now. So I don't know what Mendes can do to fix that, aside from not just beating Vic Salvador, but beating him decisively. If he does that, then maybe we got our next Puerto Rican star. Because all these other guys, they've either lost titles or just never panned out. From Emmanuel Rodriguez, Felix Verdejo, Jesus Rojas, Alberto Machado, all of those guys, they either did not live up to their potential or they won a world title and then lost it at some point this year. And Angel Acosta, another guy who won a world title and then lost the title this year. So yeah, boy, there's a lot of boxing. By the way, that was from the WBO world title section of this weekend. Because there is still more. There is still a lot of boxing heading this weekend. So you have tonight, August 22nd, you have Luis Feliciano against Gennadiy Gomez, main eventing Golden Boy Promotions card in Indio, California. You can see that on Ring TV. Co-main event, Blair Cobbs versus Steve Villalobos. Blair Cobbs, my God, this guy is... Oh God, Blair Cobbs is, personality-wise, this guy is a star in the making. He is so charismatic. He's so electric. Guy comes out, to Stone Cold Steve Austin's theme song in his last fight, and he dazzled in his last fight. He's a guy to watch out for. I don't know. The jury's still out whether or not he's going to be a great fighter, but in terms of being an electric personality, good God, Blair Cobbs has the it factor. Let's see what else. There's a lot. Tomorrow as well. You got a couple of cards on Showtime and UFC Fight Pass. Let's start with the Showtime, or the Showbox card in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Vladimir Shishkin versus DeAndre Ware, super middleweight fight between two prospects, two very good prospects. I like that fight. Shishkin and DeAndre Ware, I think those guys are gonna do exceptionally well. I think they're gonna have a really good fight. And you got on the undercard, Shoyahan Ergashev, who is this rising junior welterweight contender. I don't know, there's a lot to like. There's a lot to like about Ergashev for now, but I feel like he's still a few years from really being a contender. You got Arnold Kegai against Vladimir Tikhonov, super bantamweight contender. Kegai is highly ranked in a couple of governing bodies, if I'm not mistaken, but he still hasn't wowed us with how supposedly great he is. There isn't one performance that he's had as of late you can say, okay, do we know Arnold Kegai is a world champion in the making? So he's still in that developmental stage, but I'm glad they're not putting him out immediately into the world title picture, because he still needs a little bit more seasoning, and putting him on the Showbox cards, I think they're going to do wonder for him. One fight that is weirdly not on this card is Jaron Ennis versus Franklin Mamani. Ennis is the best prospect out of this entire lineup, and he's the one fight that I believe is not on TV. So I don't know what to say about that. But Jaron Ennis, he's a really good fighter. Coming in at 154 pounds. He's really, really good. He's I want to say he's a world champion in the making, but he's a top contender in the making at the very least. Then you got a show in Everett, Massachusetts on UFC Fight Pass. Real quick on the lineup, Abraham Nova against Miguel Beltran Jr., super featherweight bout. Nova is a really, really solid prospect. He's a guy that could make his way up to title contendership in a year or so. He's going up against Miguel Beltran Jr. I like, he's a decent enough of an opponent. He was fighting last year against Yuriorkis Gamboa, and Beltran was completely, mollywopped in that bout. There wasn't anything good to watch on that show, but Miguel Beltran fought Yuriorkis Gamboa, who's undergoing a bit of a career resurgence, so, there's an interesting fight right there. You got, let's see, Carlos Gongora against Alan Zavala. Gary Spike O'Sullivan, he was supposed to fight on the show, but visa issues will prevent him from not being able to go to this fight, to this card. So, no Gary Spike O'Sullivan on this show, but you still got Abraham Nova, you still got Carlos Gongora, James Perella, Alex Duarte. You still got some decent names out there. DAZN, August 24th, Juan Francisco Estrada versus Dwayne Beamon for the WBC Super Flyweight title. This is I like this fight. I'm not super in love with this fight because I think Estrada's gonna beat Dwayne Beamon, but with the year that we're having, with all the upsets that we got, at this point, who knows? Maybe Beamon can pull off just incredible upset against Juan Francisco Estrada. Not much to talk about this one. I think Estrada wins this one fairly easily. On the undercard, you got Filip Hrgovic, Liam Smith, John O'Carroll, Shakram Giasov, Alexis Espino, Diego Pacheco. You got a lot of solid names fighting on this undercard. This is I say give this a watch. I'll say give this a watch. And lastly, FS1 from Edinburgh, Texas. Brandon Figueroa against Javier Nicolas Chacon for the WBA interim super bantamweight title. I'm not gonna spend way too much time talking on this. I've had Figueroa on the show last week, so you want Brandon's thoughts on the fight and a bunch of other topics, you can head on over to that podcast to listen to that interview. But Javier Nicolas Chacon is a guy who's faced some solid names throughout his career, but he's lost all of those big fights. He doesn't have a whole lot of experience fighting outside of his native Argentina. And I see this as a fairly easy win for Brandon Figueroa. I think this kid is on his way to becoming a very, very good fighter, potentially crashing the top 10, maybe even as soon as this fight that we got on Saturday. If he performs as well as I expect him to, I think you can make a very solid case that he's a top 10 fighter knocking on the door of the top 5 and the world champions at 122 pounds maybe next year. So I think Brandon Figueroa wins this fight. So that about does it for this episode of the Fightful Boxing Podcast. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, leave us a thumbs up. Subscribe to our Fightful MMA and Boxing YouTube channel. Leave us a comment, giving your feedback on the show. What else you want me to discuss for next week's show. If you're listening to this on iTunes, leave us a nice review. It really helps us with our visibility out there, not just with this podcast, but all the other Fightful podcasts from pro wrestling, discussing WWE Raw, WWE SmackDown, to our MMA shows, listing your boy with Sean Ross Sapp and Fightful owner Jimmy Van. We got a ton of different podcasts, all of them great, so I highly suggest you check it out. Head on over to Fightful.com and FightfulBoxing.com for all the latest news in boxing, and for Fightful.com for everything boxing, pro wrestling, and MMA. Carlos Toro, the Fightful Boxing Podcast, signing out.